Scott, why don't we begin by your introducing yourself?
Well, I'm Scott Kragie. I'm a 66-year-old white male who was diagnosed with Parkinson's approximately 8 years ago.
And what would you say distinguishes Parkinson's from other diseases that you know about, not from a medical standpoint, but from a patient standpoint?
Well, anything that affects the brain has I think, a higher risk of adverse side effects. And since all of our drugs are working with our brain, there's a greater array of negative side effects.
What negative side effects have you personally experienced?
Well, as I was telling you shortly ago, just a little while ago, I've tried Benztropine, which is a much older anti-Parkinson's drug. And I found that within 2 days of being on it, my short-term memory had dropped off very substantially, so that it was really frightening.
What was the remedy?
I stopped taking it.
Why did you have to take it in the first place?
My neurologist thought it might be helpful in dealing with tremor because for most of my Parkinson's experience, it's been pretty much on the left side and not that much of an interference. In recent months, it seems to have expanded to the right side, and a little bit more tremor of the hands occurred in both hands.
It's funny that you mentioned that, peculiar that you mentioned that, because I've always thought of you as having predominantly non-motor symptoms.
That's correct. Cognitive symptoms are typically later on in the disease, whereas for me it was the first noticeable effect.
As I recall, you had problems concentrating?
Yes. Concentration, executive function, short-term memory.
Does that provide a clue as to why Parkinson's is different from other diseases in that it manifests itself differently for different patients?
That certainly is true, that I've never met anyone who I felt reflected my condition. And I've met a lot of people with Parkinson's since being diagnosed.
Accordingly, does the therapy that works best for you differ from the therapies that work best for other patients?
Well, there's not much in the way of benefit for cognitive symptoms. I took Exelon for a couple of years, which is thought to be beneficial for cognitive disorders. And in terms of my mobility and tremor and stiffness, I'm probably fairly typical.
Does Parkinson's as a whole differ from other diseases insofar as patients are more responsible for identifying their symptoms and working out what therapy or a combination of therapies work best, as opposed to another disease where the doctor gives you the XYZ pill, and after 30 days on the XYZ pill, you're either cured or try something else?
Yes, I think so, partly because of the wide array of symptoms, and going back to my point about taking drugs that directly impact the brain, the range of side effects is very broad and they're not insignificant side effects. So I think that makes it a little bit more difficult than your typical chronic disease like diabetes or something.
My understanding is sometimes it's difficult to differentiate the symptoms that result from the disease and the symptoms that result from the medications.
Yeah, and the only solution I can see to that is that everything is an ongoing experiment that relies on your subjective evaluation of it.
How much of that is your evaluation as opposed to the doctor's?
That's probably 90% of my observation. Unlike a nephrologist who knows every nook and cranny of the kidney, the neurologist knows extremely little about the brain.
The conclusion I draw from that, and I wonder whether you agree, is that Parkinson's rewards patients who educate themselves and who are willing to be proactive in addressing the symptoms that they have.
Well, I think that's right. It's particularly important because of the wide variety of symptoms and contraindications, that it's much more of a back and forth with your physician than typical chronic disease.
Is there anything that you know now, having had Parkinson's for quite a while, that you wish you had known at the beginning? By the beginning, I mean when you were first diagnosed.
I guess I would have liked a crystal ball that would have given me a reasonably accurate picture of the progression over time. My progression, and I find it bizarre to call it progression because that means you're talking about progress, and it ain't progress. But the inability of neurologists to define the path that you're going down and give you some idea of the timing that might be involved, that's frustrating and maybe not that different from other chronic diseases, but it certainly is a frustration.
So you wish you had known when you were first diagnosed where you would be today, instead of having to wait till the day to find out.
Yes. It's a mixed bag knowing what's coming.
Are you better off today than you thought you would be, or worse off, or had you no idea?
I think I'm better off than I had anticipated. That the progression for me has been slow.
What do you attribute that to, this slow progression? Or have you no idea why? It just is.
Good luck.
I feel much the same way for much the same reason. Good luck, good care. I had, unlike you, I had deep brain stimulation surgery, and that seems to have arrested the progress of the disease for me. It doesn't have that effect for everyone. And I guess I'd have to say, as my neurologist keeps reminding me, it arrests the progress of the symptoms of the disease. The neurologists seem to think the disease is progressing as it would without the surgery. And my symptoms were different from yours. I had the more typical tremor as the predominant symptom, that and poker face, with which you're familiar. You turned it to your advantage, as I recall.
In my practice as a lawyer, I would be involved in negotiations, not on a daily basis, but certainly weekly. And on several occasions, the opposing counsel or my own client said, and they were meaning it as a compliment, that I had an excellent poker face. This was before I was diagnosed, and I didn't attribute that to anything, but oddly enough, it helped my practice in that small way. Most Parkinson's symptoms are very subtle, that you don't wake up with a pain in the side one day and have that be diagnosed as caused by Parkinson's.
It's not like appendicitis.
Right.
What advice would you give to someone today, having had your experience, who just found out he or she was diagnosed with Parkinson's?
Get a good exercise routine and adhere to it religiously.
What is your exercise regime?
I try and go to the gym every day. I probably end up doing it 5 times a week. And my routine involves being on the treadmill for a half hour to 40 minutes and doing a lot of stretching and doing a variety of weights.
Is this something you developed yourself, or you hired a physical therapist, or how did you get to this particular regime?
I did it myself. It follows from a regime that I was doing for a number of years before I was diagnosed. So I just started doing it more frequently. And that was originally, my routine was recommended by a physical therapist, not as a solution to Parkinson's, but just for general good health and how to deal with back issues, which I have also.
And you feel better after exercising?
Yes, especially after stretching.
Why do you think that's so?
Because the exercise directly addresses one of the problems, which is stiffness. You can actually loosen yourself up. It doesn't last terribly long, but you can get more of a sense of normalcy.
Is it like a massage?
Well, I'm a big fan of massage as well. The massage helps for about 36 hours.
That's pretty good. I mean, it's not as good as helping for a year, but you feel the beneficial effects of massage for as long as 36 hours after the massage.
Yes.
And you're saying the stretching, to some extent, replicates that.
Yes.
Just so other people know what you mean by stretching. What parts of your body do you stretch? How do you stretch them?
The legs, actually the whole body I try and work on, from mobility exercises for the head and neck. Hamstring stretching is very important. And I find just things that, like rotating my arm in as wide an arc as I can, really has some fairly immediate impact. That I can tell that I feel better as soon as I've done the exercise.
Recently, Scott, I've taken up boxing as a form of therapy. It's not really boxing exercises, but many of them are stretching exercises. So I may be getting, unknowingly, the same benefits you're getting from stretching.
The mantra, keep on moving, is really true.
If you had known when you were first diagnosed that you'd be where you are today, would you be thrilled, moderately pleased, surprised, shocked?
I'd have been relieved, because the expectations were, at least based on a few people that I had known who'd had the disease, they were severely impacted at a much faster pace. So my expectation was that the pace would be pretty quick. And I've been fortunate, probably having a good wife, a good doctor, and good drugs, and luck, that it's progressed pretty slowly.
Although I hear from the doctors that a slow rate of progression is fairly typical. As you point out, it's not as though you're going to wake up one morning and have a pain in your side or dramatic change from the way you felt a day earlier. Progression is typically slower, but it seems to be markedly slower in your case at least.
All I can attribute it to is largely luck. I think my exercise routine has helped retard the progression of the disease, but I don't know that that really provides the answer. The exercise is something you can do about it.
That must make you feel better. In other words, it's one thing to be the beneficiary of good luck. It's another to be a beneficiary of good luck and your own activity. You're actually making a contribution to your health.
Yeah, I still play golf, and golf has a score, and I can mark the progression of the disease by the increasing number of strokes.
What was your average score before you had Parkinson's, and how has that changed?
I would score in the high 70s to low 80s when I was a younger adult. And now I can have magical days that I'll break 90, but I can also have days when, and I usually give up recording the score, but I'd probably be shooting 110 or 120.
Now, of course, your score probably would have gone up even if you didn't have Parkinson's, just due to the effect of aging.
Right.
But not that much.
Right. Where I notice it, not just in golf, but other sports that I try and do as well, is that the ability to modulate to what we call touch in golf, to be able to get a sense of how hard to hit it, to go the distance that you have. That sense of touch is gone. So I find that if I can swing a club at full speed, I do pretty well. When it comes to the short game, where you don't swing full out. You have to make adjustments in how far to take it back and how hard to drive through the ball. That sort of subtlety is greatly diminished. And it carries over to everyday chores like slicing tomatoes or garlic, that knowing how much pressure you're exerting, you really have to think about it as opposed to just doing it.
Does your cognitive impairment curtail your ability to communicate well with other Parkinson's patients?
I don't think so. It means that I don't directly identify with some of the people in our Parkinson's support group. Since there's no model, you accept Parkinson's for what it is, And even despite the variety of symptoms, a person with Parkinson's can identify somebody else with Parkinson's by looking at their eyes all the way across a room. There's a sense that this person on the other side of the room is having the same cognitive experience that I am. And it's proven to be highly accurate. If you have a lot of motor symptoms, that's an obvious display. But the non-motor symptoms can still be read with body language.
Thanks, Scott.